Today we're going to talk about why Abraham Lincoln was a cocksucker.
This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
Coming at you from a hidden location deep in the woods somewhere in Texas. Slightly overweight, probably intoxicated, nevertheless mercifully insatiable alpha male. This is the Juliet Delta Podcast.
Hello everybody and welcome back. This is episode 3 of the Juliet Delta Podcast. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive right in, why don't we? Today we're going to talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough. A subject where we get indoctrinated in our public school system. The topic is Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator. So we're going to jump right in. Let me get me a little pinch of snuff. Oh yeah. Let me get me a little sip of my brown water here. And as always, we're drinking Bullet Rye, the green label, on the rocks. I don't know why you wouldn't drink whiskey on the rocks. I know grown women that drink whiskey on the rocks by the half gallon. If you're a man and can't drink whiskey on the rocks, I think it's go ahead in time that you just stick to beer and rum. Leave the brown water for the manly men. So anyway, today we're going to jump right in and talk about how Abraham Lincoln was a piece of shit. We're going to get right into it. We're going to stir some shit up. Ain't no reason not to. We're going to try to do away with a little bit of that indoctrination that you've pretty much everybody's had if you've been in the public education system and most private education systems, because let's face it, the people teaching in private education systems don't really know any better. They've been indoctrinated too. So, without further ado, let's just jump right in. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, the 16th president. He's regarded as one of the greatest presidents of our time, the freer of the slaves, the hero of all, the man who preserved the Union. Horseshit. But let's go ahead and jump right into Wikipedia. Wikipedia, pretty much take that with a grain of salt. The random people can add to it. It's definitely not a source anyone would use. Get rid of that little snuff floating around on my tongue. That doesn't help for the speaking. Wikipedia. It does give us a general biography that's very similar to what we're all taught in school. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. Until his assassination, he led the United States through its Civil War, its bloodiest war, and perhaps its greatest moral constitution and political crisis. In doing so, he preserved the Union, abolished slavery, strengthened the federal government, and modernized the economy. Well, I don't know how any little kid in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then a big kid in college could think any different than he was a badass dude. He was one of the greatest. Think about that. Unfortunately, in Wikipedia, you get almost no true facts about Lincoln. You get the dressed up, doctored up, indoctrinated version that we're all supposed to believe is God's honest truth. Well, the truth is he was a piece of shit. He was a straight cocksucker. He was one of the worst presidents. You could argue that Woodrow Wilson was just as bad. And really, when you go through all of your research, you're looking at Woodrow Wilson, and you're like, man, this guy was a piece of shit. He was bad. He really, really made the federal government big and really stripped away, liberty, freedom, sovereignty of the individual and the states. And then you go right back to Lincoln, and golly, I mean, then you say he's the worst. It's all about, the moment you're in when you're studying. It's up for debate. The problem I have is that Lincoln is regarded as one of the greatest presidents. He's up there, George Washington is the king, He's on the throne when it comes to greatest presidents. But our education, our indoctrination and education system, they place Abraham Lincoln just to his left or right in one of the smaller chairs up next to the throne. He's one of the greatest. No, he was probably one of the worst if you care about freedom, liberty, and sovereignty and the way the government was set up by our founders to run. He was one of the worst, if not the worst, that really sped up the federal government becoming as powerful as it is today. So we gotta talk about federalism for you to understand a little bit about where we're at. Federalism is a long, deep topic, and I'm going to do an entire podcast over federalism so that everybody understands at least what my research at a layman level is. And I think constitutional lawyers are probably the most inept and uneducated and ignorant when it comes to the Constitution. They understand constitutional law. They don't understand the Constitution and the meaning of it and the spirit in which it was written by our founders. Federalism simply is that each state is its own country. Let's look back. During that time, the word state meant country. The state of England, the state of France, the state of Texas, the state of Mississippi. The individual states came together and formed a union voluntarily. Let's not remember, it wasn't too long ago when they joined. Not very long ago, just the other day, they had a bloody, bloody revolution. And this bloody revolution was for their freedom. They weren't going to give it up right after they won it and say, okay, let's give it all back. Let's give it all to a federal government. No, why even fight and die? Why sacrifice your life for freedom if you're going to turn around and we'll just give it away? Conservatives drive me fucking crazy because they don't understand this basic concept of freedom and liberty, sovereignty of free people. And so a federalism is the state retains all of its original power as its own country, except for the very limited enumerated powers delegated by the Constitution. The states came together and said, we're going to form this union, and we're going to give this federal government a very restricted, very limited power. Everything else, all of their powers, all of their decisions, all of their laws are retained by the people in their respective states. They decide how they want to live according to their principles. And then some of the founders said, well, it's not clear enough. Only in some of the states, some of the people came together and said, well, this isn't quite clear enough. This isn't a big enough restriction. This could be misinterpreted one day. We want everybody to know that we are still independent countries, that we just happen to be in union. Just like today we think of the European Union. The European Union doesn't mean that France is in its own country still, or Germany or England. They're all still their own country. They're just in a union with each other for economic reasons, all kind of reasons. War, they're allies, and the main one is economic, obviously. So what we have a group of states that said we're going to stay our own countries, but we're going to form a union. Within that union, we're going to give a central federal government very limited power. And here it is in the Constitution. Boom, 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 boom. Not very many. And you can go look them up. If you're too ignorant to read the preamble and the Constitution and actually understand it, it's very easy to understand. You don't need any help. Just read it. Read the Constitution through. Take some notes. Write down every time the Constitution which was the states coming together, forming this union, this is what they said the federal government had power over. Need another little swig, wet my whistle. So we also have to pay attention to the fact that the Constitution doesn't grant any rights and doesn't apply to any people. It is simply a restriction on the federal government. Because what happened is some of these people said, oh, no, wait a minute. And when I say people, it was just people in certain states. They said, we'll agree to this Constitution only if you promise to make amendments to it, a Bill of Rights. And they said, sure, we'll do that. We got to get this thing amended. We got to form this union. We got to get it done. Economic reasons, the threat of war. I mean, you're independent little states, the fear of another country going to war against one of the original 13 colonies, well, the other 12 could be like, none of our business. You're doing your own thing down there. And if you pissed off Spain or England, Britain again, hey, we already fought that war, buddy. If they come across the border, we'll handle it. But until then, and that was a fear. I'm not saying that would happen just like that. But that were some of the reasons that they wanted to form this union. There were a lot more, and we'll go into that one day. But when the states ratified the Constitution, they wanted a Bill of Rights, and they wanted it amended. They wanted amendments added. Why? They wanted to further not really further restrict. They wanted to repeat and make very, very clear of the restrictions that they wanted everyone to understand very clearly. The First Amendment. The federal government may not, you have the freedom of speech. It means the federal government can't restrict your speech. Doesn't mean anything about the state. Doesn't mean anything about, in a private building. You come into my house, you can't say whatever you want. You don't have this freedom of speech. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater and say, oh, freedom of speech, I don't suffer any consequences. There's laws against profanity in certain cities, states. You don't have freedom of speech. You have freedom from the federal government coming and stopping you from speaking. Now, the people in your city may say, hey, we don't want anybody to use the F word in public. If the state of Texas wants to ratify that and put that in their Constitution and make it a law, then they can. And people, the conservatives are the worst. They'll be like, no, the Constitution says I have the freedom of speech. No, it doesn't. It says the federal government cannot infringe on your freedom of speech. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say these 10 things. Well, when we're speaking about the original 10, obviously there's more amendments now, but the original 10 amendments to the bill, your Bill of Rights, is for the people. Nowhere. Not one single founder, not one single ratifier. You can say the founders were the greatest people, for forming this country. Or not the greatest people, but, they were the greatest part of forming this country. Yeah, they were really, really important. Even more important were the ratifiers. The ratifiers are the ones that said, hey, you can write anything you fucking want, founders. Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, you can want whatever you fucking want, but we, the states, independent free countries, we decide. We will ratify it or we won't. So the ratifiers were the one that had all the power. They decided what would go and what wouldn't. After all, they're free, independent countries, states. The state of each one of those 13 colonies. So just like the Second Amendment, conservatives just drive Republicans. I'm a small R Republican with Jeffersonian principles. I'm as far away from the left as anybody can get. I will never vote Democrat. I will never vote, anything that's liberal. I am for little tiny federal government, representation of the people in their respective states. I am for limited government. I believe my state constitution is much more important. It applies to me, where the federal government does not. The federal Constitution and Bill of Rights doesn't apply to me individually. It is a restriction on the federal government only. So what does the Second Amendment say? It says that the federal government may not infringe on my gun rights here in Texas, because I'm in Texas. If you're in Mississippi, it says the federal government cannot infringe on your rights in Mississippi. It says that the federal government may not infringe on your rights in California. That's why California can have different gun laws than they do here in Texas, because the people of California are allowed to live by their principles. If they want to have 0 guns, Godspeed, people. Those are your principles. If you get massacred, like just happened at YouTube the other day, if you get massacred because you have gun-free zones everywhere and all the good people aren't allowed to have guns, go with God. Whatever happens to you happens. I hope you learn your lesson. The people of Texas say, no, we don't want to have any restrictions. You know, every state has a constitution. By saying that the Second Amendment grants you the power and the right to bear arms, you're saying your state constitution doesn't matter. That's what you're saying, conservatives. You're saying that you want the federal government to be more powerful than your state, than your sovereignty and your freedom. You want them to rule over you. Well, if you want the federal government to rule over you, don't bitch when the federal government applies the same laws it would to the people in California and gives them their principles and morals, and turns around and puts it on you in Texas or Louisiana and Arkansas and Oklahoma. You can't bitch. You want the federal government to give you rights, to have the power to infringe on your Second Amendment rights. You have gun rights, and that's in your state constitution, and I do in Texas, and I have guns all over my house. I have guns in my vehicles. I have guns in my backpacks. I love guns. Just about every single human being I'm friends with on this planet loves guns and has guns. There's a few liberal friends that, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to convert them. I'm starting with getting them to drink whiskey instead of Malibu and pineapple juice. I got to start getting them to eat a little meat, quit eating lettuce and grass only. We're taking it one step at a time. We're learning to crawl before we walk for some of these, autistic people. But I love them. You don't throw away the retarded baby with the dishwasher. Don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. How's that go? Well, whatever. Anyway, I'm getting off of the subject. I'm just really trying to drive home federalism. Federalism is, we here in Texas, we should decide how we live. We decide our principles. Well, guess what? That's what all the ratifiers and the founders, that's what they all agreed on. And for all that time, late 1700s, boom, here it goes. Here we go, 1800s, boom, 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 boom. We're traveling along, everything's going great. Yeah, the Supreme Court's making some rulings that they don't have the power to do here and there, but they're not real big ones. Some of them are pretty important. We'll talk about some of those. But for all due purposes, most people were still pretty free, pretty sovereign. They understood that where they got their rights were from their state, and they were allowed to live by the principles that were the same as the people around them. If they didn't like that, they could move to another state. Keep moving west, make your own state. So people were happy that way. They were free. The people that wanted to live like they did in Pennsylvania back then, they stayed in Pennsylvania. They loved it. Same with all the other states. You had Virginia. People in Virginia had a very, very distinct lifestyle, and they loved it. People that didn't like that, well, they're not going to change for you. They were like, oh, we're not changing our Virginia. They were very loyal. If you don't like it, get the fuck out. Go somewhere else that aligns with your morals and principles, but you're not changing it here. And don't you fucking dare ask the federal government to change the way we live. So they've been just bebopping along for a long time. Then came Lincoln, the issue of slavery. But was it the issue of slavery? I I want to talk about why Southerners went to war. If you do studies, you can look at 10, 100, 1,000 different studies from every kind of scholar, whether they're extremely liberal, conservative, libertarian. It doesn't matter. You're going to get a 2.5 to 3.5% number of people that own slaves in the South. There are many scholars that say there was a higher percentage of people that own slaves in the North. But we're not going to talk about the North. We're going to talk about the South. I'll even give you 5%. That's higher than any scholar will agree, that a percentage of men, white men in the South that own slaves. 5% is higher than anything that you can find. But I'll grant you 5% just for the sake of not wanting to lowball the figure. That means 95% of the people that went off to war. Now, this is people that went to war. That means 95% or more of the men that went off to war to fight for the South didn't own slaves. So let's think about that. Why would those people go off to war and fight for that very small percentage, those 1 or 2 people, those 10 people in the county that own slaves? If you're talking about 3%, you got several thousand people, you're not talking about many. And when we say counties, the counties were bigger too. I mean, how many people were in a county? Not thousands. We're probably talking about hundreds. So if you had 300 people living in a county, you got 3, 4. Let's go with the high number that we know is higher than any statistical, empirical evidence that we have. 5 people for every 100 that lived in a county. You got 300 people living in a county. You got 15 people on slaves. That's not a lot. So why did this 95% of people go off to fight so that those people could keep their slaves? No. Those people, the slavery gave those people a competitive edge. They were the big box store of their time. The people that didn't own slaves, they were the local business. Guess what? If you're a local business and you're trying to, you're a local grocery store, you're a local, hardware store, you're competing against Lowe's and Home Depot. You're competing against Walmart, grocery stores. You're not going to give them an edge to anything. You don't want to help them in any way. You can't sell no matter what at the prices they sell. The only thing you can do is have better products and better customer service, cleaner stores. You can't beat them on price. Well, guess what? When you're selling fucking cotton, cotton's pretty much cotton. Sure, you can have a better crop because you give it a little more care, but when you got a guy that's got 30 or 50 slaves out there every day really taking care of these crops, he's probably going to have better quality than you do with your 8 kids, and if you're lucky, your aunts and your uncles and your granddad's still around, or not your granddad, but your dad and your kids and their granddad and your cousins, they're all in the same area working the same land. It may be your little farms, but they're all close by and you're helping each other, and the small communities are helping each other. And they're all trying to compete with the big box store. They're all trying to compete with Lowe's and Walmart and Home Depot. Nothing against those places. No, they didn't go off to war to make sure they could keep their competitive edge against them. That was against their better interest. They went off to fight for principle. Up until that time, for nearly 100 years, they had been free, sovereign people, and no one would tell them how to live in their state. They decided. They made their laws. They voted. They were represented by their people in their state, and they lived by their laws. That's why they went off to fight. It's not even just about states' rights. It's about a dictator coming to tell people how to live. And they weren't going to do it. They just weren't going to have it. It could have been about anything. And it wasn't initially about slavery. Don't be fooled. Sure, you can find some cherry-picked quotes by a general here or a colonel there, and reasons for ratifying. Yes, they talked about slavery. Of course they did. It was an issue. But it wasn't the only issue, and it wasn't the main issue. It just happened to be that slavery was the issue the federal government and Abraham Lincoln were choosing to draw the line in the sand to take power. They could have made it about gay rights. They could have made it about abortion if that was an issue at the time. Could have made it about anything. If let's just say Abraham Lincoln said, "Oh, we're going to have gay marriage is legal and gay people have the same rights as anybody else." Guess what? A bunch of states would have said, "Hell no, we're out of here. That's not living according to our principles." And then, the history would label them as homophobic people instead of racists. That's basically what happened. The version of the Civil War that's taught in nearly all textbooks goes something like this. The only reason the South wanted to leave the Union was to protect slavery. The South had no right to secede. The South started the war by firing on Fort Sumter. The war was fought over slavery. The defeat of the South was a victory for democratic government, for government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The North's triumph brought about a new birth of liberty in America. This is the version of war that I've accepted for most of my life up until the last, 5 to 10 years. That's what most people are taught in school, elementary school, middle school. My daughter's being taught about Lincoln right now. But why did the South secede? There's considerable evidence that many Republican leaders opposed secession and supported waging war on the South in large part of economic considerations. Numerous Republicans, including Lincoln, they were really worried about the loss of their tariff revenue from the Deep South states. The Republicans favored a high federal tariff. Most influential northern businessmen did. They proved this by passing the Morrill tariff in the House of Representatives right before Lincoln took office. This tariff went up from 17% overall to 26% overall, up to 36% on certain items. Nevertheless, despite their support for these policies, many Republicans favored the South to go in peace. At least for the first few months during the secession of the Deep South states. But that support disappeared pretty quickly when the Confederacy announced its new low tariff rate in March of 1861. Once the Confederacy free trade, low tariff policy was announced, very powerful northern financial interests began to strongly oppose this peaceful coexistence with the Confederacy. This led northern moneymen to, start sending public letters to Lincoln. They demanded he take action to protect their northern commerce. Prominent northern newspapers suddenly started to reject the idea of peaceful separation. You can look up tons of stuff, articles written in newspapers at the time. But Lincoln even supported a constitutional amendment that would have made the federal government's protection of slavery implicit and permanent. He didn't care about slaves. He cared about keeping money. He cared about keeping a union together for wealth, for people that he cared about in his party, people he was friends with. He wanted a union. That's the number one thing. He wrote a letter. He wrote a letter to Horace Greeley. And in this letter, he said, and now this is in 1862, so I'm kind of skipping around a little bit. I'm just kind of giving you a feeling of who Abraham Lincoln was. Oh, of course, he made many, many statements about slavery and how horrible it was and how pro, African American he was and how awful the Southerners were. Yeah, that's after he was going to war to make sure he could keep the money. He had to have a reason. He couldn't go down in history as the president that sent, 300 and some odd Union soldiers and to go kill to their deaths, where 300 and some odd, Confederate soldiers also died. over 600. They're saying now the numbers could be 700,000 men died. He wasn't going to be the president that went down, that had that many deaths on his hand, their blood on his hands, just so he could keep some money. Oh, no. He had to make it about something much more just, much more honorable, and that was freeing the slaves. What better way? He wrote this letter to Horace Greeley, and he said, let's see, the sooner the national authority can be resolved. He said, my paramount object is the struggle is to save the Union, is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps save the Union. That's what he thought. That's what Lincoln thought about slavery. He didn't give a shit. He needed to keep the Union together for money. That's why. That's why the South was leaving. They wanted to have their low tariffs. They didn't want to be taxed out of existence by an government that was getting more powerful and more powerful. You can't cherry pick some quotes here and there by people that were very pro-slavery. There were. Let's don't pretend slavery wasn't an issue. It was definitely an issue, but it wasn't the main issue. It just happened to be something that was thrown in there to cover up what Lincoln was trying to do. To those people that went off to war, their principles were more important than their own existence, their own financial gain. Think about it. If they go and help preserve these people, these 5% or less of their competitors in their state, in their county, in their city, their right to own slaves, they're making sure the big box stores stay alive and can get their products cheaper and can produce them cheaper, sell them cheaper, and probably make them go out of business maybe one day. Or at the best, they're not going to be able to be as competitive, and they're going to have to sell their cotton super cheap, their crops super cheap. And guess what? That means less food on their table. They wanted to buy 2 horses this year. Now they can only buy 1. Now they got to save up for a couple of years to buy a new horse. They got to plant less crops this year because they can't afford the seed. You think they went off to fight to make sure that would stay the status quo? No, they went off to fight because they said no one will rule us. We are free people, and we're not going to let a king give us something that we should have. We're not going to let a king take away someone else's right and someone else's freedom because we get a little more cheese on our plate. No, they stood up and said, no, will not happen. I say this just like I want you to really understand that slavery was just like any other issue of the day. Just like gay rights. You could say gay rights was the issue, abortion was the issue. I've already repeated this, or I am repeating this. I can sit here and say that I'm personally for gay people having the same legal rights as married people. I don't think that they should have the religious rights and the right to have marriage in a religious sense. They should be allowed to have a partnership because I think that gay people should have the same legal rights as married people do. Why? Let me tell you my own little story. My own little story, I knew a lady. She was gay. She was with her partner for over 30 years, going on 40 years. I don't know the exact amount of years. She got sick, and she went to the hospital, and she was on her deathbed. Now, this lady, when she came out and was gay and started pursuing her lifestyle, this was a long time ago, obviously. It was very, very a big deal. It wasn't accepted at all like it is today. And her parents were very religious, very conservative, and they shunned her. They said, "You're not our daughter anymore. We don't want you to have anything to do with you." And that's hard to take, to be shunned. That's conditional love. We're brought up to believe that our parents, have unconditional love for us. And when they don't, God, that's really damaging to your psyche to know that your parents only love you if you live the way they want you to live. They don't love you for who you are. And you can disagree with someone's lifestyle. I can disagree with my kid's lifestyle. If he's being a bum and he's not taking care of himself and he's wanting me to take care of him and provide for him when he's grown, I don't have to accept it. I don't have to approve of it. But I'm not going to quit loving him. I'm not going to shun him from my life. Well, these people shun their daughter. You're dead to us. She chose love. And she went to live with this woman 30 plus years. The majority of her adult life, she lived with this woman. And on her deathbed, guess who showed up? Her parents. Guess who the doctor and the hospital gave the legal rights to decide whether to pull the plug or whether to do these procedures? Her parents. This woman that had given her entire life in love to this woman for her entire adult life had zero rights. She couldn't even go into visitation when it was family only. Think about that. And ultimately, these parents decided to pull the plug. They did. Hadn't seen her for over 30 years, and they get to decide. And I was young when this happened. I'm 30, in my late 30s now. And that affected me. I knew then that it was wrong to not allow homosexual people to have the same partnership rights in a legal sense. So I can say that. I can say they should have the same legal rights as married people do. And still say they shouldn't be allowed to have the religious rights of marriage, because religious people want that sanctity. They want that sanctity of marriage between a man and woman. Let them have it. Let them keep that and give partnership rights. But in the state of Texas, if the majority of people say, in a free society, in federalism, the people of Texas say, no, we don't want homosexual marriage. It's against our principles. We don't want it here. Then that's the way it is. The federal government has zero right to come in and say, you have to allow gay people to be married in your state. That's trampling on people's freedoms. The people of Texas want to live this way. The people of California can live the way they want to. If there's a group of people in Texas that don't agree with it, and it's the number one issue in their lives, you're free to go to a state, sell what you have, go to a state, and live your life according to your principles around people that have the same morals and principles. That's true freedom. That's true freedom. If I was born in California, guess what? I'd leave. I couldn't stand living by the principles of the people in that state right now currently. I would pack everything up, sell everything I have. I'd do whatever it takes and get a job in another state. Of course, I'm from Texas. I live in Texas now. If I know what I knew about Texas, if I was born in California, I'd choose Texas to come move to. If I have the same principles that I have now. Those same people back then said the same thing. No, we reserve the right to live how we want in our state. If Pennsylvania wants to outlaw slavery, let them have it. But not here. Not in this state. And you gotta let that go. You gotta let people be free. Does that mean I'm for slavery? Of course not. Of course I'm not for slavery. Slavery would have run its course and ended pretty quick. But I'm starting to get off topic more and talking about why the Civil War was even existed, and I suggest you quit calling it Civil War. I've called the Civil War up to this point because that's what everybody knows it by, but really it was the war of northern aggression against free people. So let's talk a little bit about Lincoln. Lincoln was the greatest tyrant in American history, no doubt. In the first 4 months of his presidency, he created a complete military dictatorship. He destroyed the Constitution. He ended forever the constitutional republic which the Founding Fathers instituted. Federalism, freedom, sovereignty. He destroyed that. And he committed horrendous crimes against civilian citizens. He formed, tyrannical, overbearing, and oppressive federal government. He formed that, which the American people still suffer to today. Let me just rattle off some things he did that were in violation, most of them in violation of the Constitution. I have to look down this list I've got jotted down, and maybe all of them. Let's see. He failed to call Congress into session after the South fired upon Fort Sumter in direct violation of the Constitution. He called up an army of 75,000 men, bypassing the congressional authority in direct violation of the Constitution. He unilaterally suspended the writ of habeas corpus, a function of Congress violating the Constitution. It gave him the powers he sought to arrest civilians without charge and imprison them indefinitely without trial. And he did that. He did that to a bunch of people. I mean, think about it. To be able to arrest people, the police just come to your house or your business, arrest you, not charge you with a crime, not allow you to have a trial, a lawyer, a phone call, and throw away the key and never even speak to you again, slam the door, and throw you some bread and water just to keep you alive, and you don't even know why you're there, and you're there forever until you die? I mean, that's pretty big deal. If that's not a dictator, if that's not somebody saying I'm the king, I don't know what is. I don't know, just that one thing, suspending habeas corpus, in my opinion, removes him from one of the greatest presidents of all time. That one thing takes away anything good you can tell me that he said or did. But let's move on. I digress. He ignored a Supreme Court order to restore the right of habeas corpus. He violated the Constitution again, and ignoring the separation of powers which the founders put in place, exactly for the purpose of preventing one man's using tyrannical powers in the executive. When a Chief Justice forwarded a copy of the Supreme Court's decision to Abraham Lincoln, he wrote out an order for the arrest of that Chief Justice and gave it to a U.S. Marshal. He was in violation of the Constitution. He unilaterally ordered a naval blockade of southern ports. That is an act of war and a responsibility of Congress and a violation of the Constitution. He commandeered and closed over 300 newspapers in the North. Any newspaper in the North that was against his war policy and his illegal military invasion of the South, he shut them down. Obviously, this is a clear violation of the First Amendment. The freedom of speech. The federal government cannot violate your freedom of speech. But he did it. He violated the First Amendment. Think about that, people. But yet he's one of the greatest. Bullshit. He sent in army forces to destroy the printing presses and machinery and newspapers that were in violation. That's a violation of the Constitution. Can you think about it? Can you think if Trump or Obama or Bush, somebody opposed the war in Iraq, somebody imposed the healthcare, the new healthcare law. Somebody is against a bunch of people, a bunch of papers, newspapers, news media, CNN is against, the wall. Fox News was against health care. Can you imagine the sitting president going in and shutting down the news network and imprisoning everyone, and then not even letting them be charged with anything, and then not giving them a lawyer, and throwing away the key, and they're just sitting in a cell to rot? Can you imagine them doing that? I mean, I'm sorry, cities would fucking burn if some shit like that went down today. But he did it. And yet, these Southerners are such bad people for standing up. They said hell no to this bullshit. He arrested and then imprisoned without charge or trial, 15,000, 20,000, maybe even 30,000 U.S. citizens who spoke out against his war and his policies, if they were even suspected of anti-war feelings. Relative to the population at the time, think about this, that's equivalent to President Bush arresting and imprisoning 150 to 200,000 Americans without trial for just disagreeing with the Iraq War. Can you imagine that? God, he sent an army to arrest the entire legislature of Maryland because they wanted to meet legally and they were debating a bill of secession. They were all imprisoned without trial. Obviously, a violation of the Constitution. He unilaterally created the state of West Virginia, a violation of the Constitution. He sent 350,000 Northern men to their death to kill 350,000 Southern men in order to force the free and sovereign states of the South to remain in the Union. They, the people, legally voted to peacefully withdraw from, all in order to continue the South's revenue flow into the North. I could go on and on about the horrible things, Lincoln did. I started this podcast off, trying to get your attention. Lincoln was a cocksucker. Man, he was way worse. He was just a straight up piece of shit. The more and more I dig into this, I can't find a president that was worse, that was just so anti-freedom. He didn't give two shits about people, citizens, freedom. He cared about what he wanted to get done, and he would do it, and the Constitution be damned. He didn't care. The checks and balances of power and separation of powers, the constitutional constraints so carefully and deliberately put in place by the Founding Fathers, they had all been destroyed in Lincoln's first months. The republic which our founders gave us had been completely destroyed, and a new nation state was set up. This one in which the free and sovereign states would afterwards only be a vessel and tributaries, slaves to an all-powerful, oppressive federal government. This new central federal national state is completely different in both nature and consequence to the original American Republic. Only one has to look around today. One only has to look around today to see the end results and the legacy of Lincoln's war, his destruction of freedom, and its institution of centralized government, power, and tyranny. So now I want to pull back a little bit. I mean, if you don't understand by now what kind of a bastard Lincoln was, how he hated freedom, he didn't care about sovereignty, he didn't care about the Constitution. If you don't know that by now, just the stuff I've given you today and in the last 30, 45 minutes, that's all it takes. Just what I've told you alone should be enough for you to understand where Lincoln was as a person and as a president and as a ruler. I'm going to bring it back to something a little less scholarly and just kind of talk for a minute. I'm tired of both parties, Republican Party, Democrat Party. I've already told you I'm a little R Republican with Jeffersonian principles. But I'm tired of both parties not understanding these basic things and basic principles. We've been brainwashed. We've been indoctrinated and taught in schools what Lincoln is. And we don't know that there was a world and freedom before that. That all the people of their respected small little countries, their states, had. People don't realize what freedoms we don't have and how the federal government is out of control. We vote for people like Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Clinton. That's for damn sure. I can find fault with plenty of things Trump does. I like some of the things he does. I like some of the things he stands for. The problem is that almost every candidate in the debates, the primaries leading up to who would be the Republican candidate, and then obviously the debates between the parties, the main debates, it doesn't matter. Almost every single topic and issue they talk to is none of the federal government's fucking business. So he can have principles that I agree with, but it's not his business. He's not the dictator. He's not the king over me here in Texas. He is now, because federal government has taken the power it doesn't have. And we, the people in our states, we don't have governors that are willing to stand at the border and saying you shall not cross. And all it's going to take is a couple of senators, a couple of governors, one governor, to stand at the border and say, you don't have a constitutional authority. The Supreme Court didn't have the power to give you the authority to decide that we have to have gay rights, we have to have abortion, we have to have this, we have to have that. Our state constitution is more important. It trumps the federal constitution. The federal constitution is a restriction on the federal only. Gotta wet my whistle. Y'all hang tight. God damn, that's good. All right. That's where I'm so frustrated with my side. The right, the conservatives, the Republicans. They're okay with having a king as long as that king gives them the stuff they want. The system is never going to change. Some days you're going to have a king that gives the people you're opposite the stuff they want, the liberals, the Democrats. You're going to have a Democrat king that gives them what they want and takes from you. And then you're going to have a Republican king that gives you some stuff you want and takes from them. Republicans are okay with that. As long as we can get a king in there that'll give me what I want, a dictator that lines up with me and my principles. I don't want a king at all. I don't want a dictator at all. That's what I want Republicans and conservatives to start to understand. I can be for 95%. I can be for 100% of Trump's principles and ideas and policies and how he feels about issues. But if 99% of them, he has no power, at least in the Constitution, the federal Constitution, and in our state Constitution, to intervene and infringe on those issues, it doesn't matter what his opinion is. See, if we were living under federalism just like we were before the Civil War, it wouldn't matter what the Supreme Court thought on most of these issues. It wouldn't matter if we had Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal people in the Supreme Court. It wouldn't really matter what kind of president we had. Guess what? You people of Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, so forth, California, Washington State, you would be allowed to live by your principles. If you want to have 100% gay marriage in California, if you want to outlaw heterosexual marriage, if you want to make white males second-class citizens, so to speak. I mean, obviously you're not going to take away certain human rights, but if you want to outlaw guns 100%, Godspeed, people. Live according to your principles. And everyone in Texas that thinks that's a good way to live, don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. And anybody in California or Washington D.C. or Pennsylvania or New York that doesn't like it, guess what? Yeah, you can have a place here in Texas or Louisiana or Mississippi. But when you have one central government deciding how all 50 states live, there is no safe haven. There is no place to go live by your principles. And you're always going to be reduced to the most liberal policies. That's the way a government that's out of control works. That's the way liberalism works. We're always progressing that direction. You know, the worst policies get put upon all of us, not just the people that want to live that way, the people that don't want to. We need to start educating ourselves on our sovereignty, our true freedom. I'm tired of a dictator. You know, I'm not okay with laws being federally passed down, Supreme Court deciding stuff that they don't have a constitutional right to even hear a court case over and then make a ruling just because I agree on it. 99.9% of the people that listen to this podcast and that are out there in the entire world that are conservative, if you said, are you for the federal government and the Supreme Court making it a law that there is no abortion in any 50 state, 99.999 of you would jump out and say, yes. Wrong. You can't tell people in California how to live. You should just say no. They can't tell those people in California how to live. I can't tell. I can't expect Californians to live by my principles. It's none of my fucking business what they do over there. If they want to kill every baby in a womb, I think you can say it's a sin and an abomination and a stench in God's nose. But it's none of your business over there. You can only take care of yourself in your state, in your community, in your group, where you live by your principles. Because if you give that power to the federal government to say no abortion, you give that government the power, that federal central government, the power to say no guns, no abortion, 100% abortion to anybody that wants it, free of charge, free health care, gay rights for everybody. See, the blade cuts both ways. You can't be for it and against it at the same time. You know, my stepdaughter, I call her my daughter most of the time because I pretty much raise her and I love her just like my own daughter. I have my own biological daughter too. I look at them both as my daughters, but my stepdaughter came home from school the other day and she was talking, they were learning about Abraham Lincoln, and they told her zero of the stuff I told you today. Not one thing. They said they had so sugar-coated and twisted it, and they made him a hero, just like all of us have thought all of our lives, like we were all indoctrinated. But she has me in her ear, so she started questioning. And she said it made her feel dirty and bad when the teacher said, you have to write a small little paragraph, a paper. It was their paper, but it was basically a one paragraph on how Abraham Lincoln inspired her. She couldn't think of a single thing. She made something up just so she could get an A. Think about that. I'm proud of her. I told her how proud of her I was. We had a long, deep conversation. We talked some more about how bad he was. You know, people go on and say all these great things about Lincoln. Let me tell you about, you know, because he was such a great emancipator. He freed the slaves. No, he didn't. You know what Lincoln did? He freed slaves in the South only. His Emancipation Proclamation didn't even free the slaves. He only freed them in states, or he only freed them in places that only applied where the federal government had no control. The southern states currently fighting against the Union. Why did he do that? Because guess what? You keep slaves in the North working hard, pumping out crops, creating wealth, and you say slaves are outlawed, all slaves are free in the South. Guess what? All that wealth starts disappearing really, really quickly. All these people that have crops that are dependent, they're selling this cotton to places outside the United States. That's how they're getting revenue to keep fighting this war. All of a sudden, that dries up. He didn't give a shit about the slaves. If he did, he would have freed every slave. It would have hurt the North. It would have crippled the North's war efforts. That's why the Emancipation, can't talk, the Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves in the South. You know, you don't get told that in school. In school, all the way through college, they actually tell you the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. That's all it says. They leave out that it freed the slaves in the South only. Only in the enemy territories where it would give him an economic advantage. I mean, how shitty and shady is that? The Southern people that stood up, they're the last true patriots. We haven't had any since. We've had people that were nationalists and were patriotic to the national central government. Those aren't patriots, people. Those are people that worship a central government, a national government. You need to go and teach your kids the pledge to the state of Texas. Your pledge allegiance to the state of Texas well, if you live in Texas, I live in Texas. I kind of live in this idea that, I mean, obviously Texas is the greatest state in the union. So when I think about things, I'm always relating it to Texas. So if you're listening to this podcast and you live outside the state of Texas, which I hope you do, find your own allegiance, pledge of allegiance to your own state. Our kids in our Texas schools and in your Mississippi schools and in your Georgia schools and your Pennsylvania schools, they're not taught the Pledge of Allegiance to their own state. Not one person can say it, but you, by God, can say the Pledge of Allegiance to a national federal government. What horseshit. Just total indoctrination. So parents, your schools aren't going to do it. They're going to keep brainwashing these little kids and these babies and turning them into brainwashed adults and basically just autistic people that are just, they worship a national government instead of, and they don't even know that they're just giving away their true sovereignty and freedom that they have. All that's there is to take. And I'm not saying you got to have a civil war to go take it. I'm saying teach them what your state bird is, your state motto, your pledge to your state, allegiance to your state. Teach them about your state flag. Each state has a heritage and something to be very proud of. And each child should grow up having allegiance to their state first, because their state is who they are. That's their own little country. The people of France, they care more about French people and the policies of France and their lives more than they care about the policies of Spain. They don't give a shit, really. Unless it directly affects them, they don't really give a shit. They're okay with letting the Spanish live the way they want to live, or the Germans live the way they want to live. They just want to live like French people want to live, by their principles. Let's start teaching our kids that that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way it was, until Abraham Lincoln unconsciously waged a war of northern aggression against free and sovereign people. They just wanted to go and live by their principles. You can say, oh, the principles were slavery. Yeah, and so was it in the North. Some people say there were more slaves in the North than there were in the South. More slave owners. More slaves were in the South, but more slave owners in the North. They just owned less slaves per slave owner. I haven't verified that. I've just read several studies by several historians that say that they feel like there's enough proof to say that's possibly and probably a fact. So, no, it wasn't that they just wanted to keep slaves. They just said, we will not be ruled. The people of the South stood up, and when they were being attacked and they were trying to have their freedom and sovereignty stripped away, they stood at the border of their state. They stood on that Mason-Dixon line, and they said, we will never fucking have a goddamn king ruling down upon us. The War of Northern Aggression, the Civil War as it's called today, was not about slavery. It was about the federal government trying to take power from free and sovereign people. And free and sovereign people went to war with the federal government. And the free and sovereign people lost. Parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, get active. Talk to your children. Find out what they're being taught. Ask them. Tell them about freedom. Tell them the true story of Abraham Lincoln. Tell them the true story about the last patriots that stood up and tried to preserve their freedom and sovereignty. Tell them about how they fought valiantly and lost. Take your kids to those statues while they still stand. Teach them what they mean. Show them the Confederate flags and why to be proud of it. Not the bastardized version that some white supremacists, took ownership of the stars and bars. Teach them about the Confederate flag, that the children in their own state. Texas has its own Confederate flag. Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, they have their own Confederate flags. Some states have multiple because there were different regiments, different parts of the state. Teach them about the respect that these patriots that lost their lives fighting a dictatorship. They were fighting for their freedom and the freedom of people to come and our freedom. They were the last true patriots that stood up. The North, the South, slavery, anti-slavery, no. This was a federal government fighting to enslave and dictate free people, and free people lost. Teach your kids that. If you don't, we'll be doomed to always be ruled over by a king.